Good morning and welcome back to Davos Worldwide's continuation of the program. I have with me a very special gentleman that I wanted to introduce you to. His name is Nils Lahr, and Nils has been looking at technology slightly differently, and especially at the evolution of AI and what is happening here. Um, to start off the discussion, Nils, I'm going to turn it over to you and give us a little background of where your journey started. How did the love for programming develop?
Sure, thank you. Well, it started actually as long ago as a mathematician. And at some point, the Air Force decided they couldn't teach people supercomputers that were computer scientists, but they could teach mathematicians computer science. So I ended up working as a student, actually, working for the Air Force, doing some interesting parallel algorithms. CNN, interestingly, was trying to move to digital, and they built the first digital studios in Manhattan. And in order to do that, they needed someone who knew parallel algorithms, which was very few people, because back then there was only a few languages. PL4 was one of them, which allowed you to write in code at that level. And so I was hired at CNN to help them build the first digital studios in Manhattan, and that's where my love of media kicked in. And I loved all things digital. So then I was able to use my math in order to go back and say, hey, the compression's really bad. I joined Stanford University. We started a company called vExtreme with a few professors there, as well as Diane Green, who people might know from various elements in Silicon Valley. We were bought up by Microsoft a few years later. We became the Windows Media team, and the compression we worked on became what is now H.264, a demonstrable part of that. And from there, it was media in terms of distribution. So I went back to Microsoft. We wrote a lot of the protocols that are used for all of Netflix and Apple, and tweaked the codec many times to make it better. And at some point, rather than consumer, I started realizing people can start using media in ways. And well, how do you use media? You use media by doing analytics. So I built another company called Synergy Sports, which was watching video all over the world. And it's interesting, kind of an introduction to the agentic concepts of today, which is how do you get distributed intelligence working all at the same time against a single plan, so that each of the intelligent components might not know what they're doing, but the overall plan is being executed by compute. And so we did that with analytics, and we did it specifically with sports, because sports had a lot of content available. And that is now the largest video analytics company in the world, which went public with Sports Radar. And that's kind of, the lights went on even further and saying, well, now that you can distribute all this work around the world in order to gain analytics and video, what else might you be able to do? And I just spent the better part of 3 years helping Microsoft figure that out. They bought a company of mine that was working with the Pentagon and the Air Force, specifically in that field. And we were working on really fun, kind of what I would call real-time versions of ChatGPT in real-world scenarios at scale.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, that's a really interesting journey. So there's a lot of confusion about agentic systems, and people just say, oh, look, it's just process. So how do you distinguish that?
I think at the highest level, I mentioned the word plan, and I think plan is a really important part here. What you'll see is that the concept of agentic systems is not new. And some people might know it as process workflow platforms like Zapier or Power Automate from Microsoft. Other people might know that as labeling systems that label documents. And there's a lot of labeling companies. There's also the original, Amazon Digital Mechanical Turk, which you can kind of put any job out there, and then you'd have millions of people fulfill that job. Well, the challenge there is each of those, and we'll get back to that at some point, but each of those are unicorn companies. So you see the demand, but each of them are very specific plans, meaning you only get one type of methodology by which you can execute these things. the Zapiers and the workflow platforms are trying to make it so it's kind of drag and drop and you can create your own plan. So it's a step in the right direction, but you're still doing almost all the work. Whereas in the agentic framework, you just tell it what your goal is, and then it creates the plan for you. And that's a very different approach in that now you have something that's creating the plan in the background. It might even be completely unknown to you, but all you really care is that your goal is met. And the fact that AI can do that is replacing these siloed companies that have dug deep into different, even my own company, Synergy Sports, for example, our goal was to track everything that happened in the game. Well, we created our own workflows over many, many years in order to do exactly that for every sport. But what if you could go to AI and just say, hey, my goal is to log everything in this game. And 5 minutes later, it says, here's your plan. Well, that just saved us 3 years and X number of millions of dollars, and it's applied to very specific, deep-rooted business challenge within sports. Well, if you go over and say, well, actually, my plan is that I want to build, machinery in China, and what do I need to do? And it gives you that plan. And so you're talking about an accelerant that as much as anything else, it's not that it wasn't possible before. It was just the amount of time, the knowledge and the expertise needed to make that plan was both from a business and an engineering standpoint, very, very high. Now you can, and the better it gets, the more this will become true. You could go to AI and ask it for a plan, and it'll implement that plan without any engineering.
Yeah, which is very interesting because, when you look at, kind of the upgrade side of things, right? So when we're looking at the constant upgrade of, or in the case of AI, let's assume autonomous thinking in upgrading certain components. So if it finds a workflow process that is not really an efficient process, how does agentic systems work in that scenario as opposed to what is happening currently? Because I would assume that, since there are so many distributed processes, if there is an inefficiency, there can certainly be a solution to it as well.
Sorry, hold on. My laptop is freezing up here. Give me a sec. All right, I'm back, I think. Can you hear me?
We have a delay on your audio and video, slightly.
Is it better now? I had an incoming call, and since I'm on my laptop, it was
yeah, there you go, a little better. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think what the current agentic systems are doing the best they can with the modalities that we've been given it. And those modalities are very much documents and text and what we call memory and things like that. And that's because those are all already digitized and there's no physicality to them. There's no architecture to accessing a document anymore. It's a single, go get me the document. Whereas as soon as you start doing more things, along the lines of what you're talking about, you actually have to have, it's not just the agentic system, but on the outside of the agentic system, you need something, whether it's robotics, you need a robot, and whether it's, manufacturing, well, you need the actual equipment in the warehouse.
Let's use an example of a smart city, right? So I mean, in a smart city,
yeah.
Is I think a perfect, ecosystem for an agentic system, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so we're excited because we see it doing really well with already digitized documents in a very almost 1-year-old, like if you think of it like a baby and a child and a teenager and whatever else, we're in the baby stage of saying, hey, these agentic systems are amazing when they're given all this digital data. It can create a plan. An example of one of those plans is I've seen an agentic system which creates every hour, it creates 20 newscasts. And it's 2 voices that talk to each other. And it sounds like an interview. Oh, what's going on in China today? And it'll talk about the markets and everything else. And it's updated within that hour. And it sounds incredibly realistic. And it's 2 people basically discussing all the Chinese markets in a podcast. And it's updated every hour. And it's all completely automated and all AI.
Yeah, that's an amazing
that podcast might have taken, it could have taken a day or 2 for an individual to put that together for one of those, and these are updated every single hour.
Yeah, I mean, one of the traditional challenges, as you know, and I think we've had a little discussion on that, is that when originally, let's look at, going back to the client server days of Microsoft and to whatever, when agentic systems were looked at, it just was considered too resource intensive, especially on the processing side of it, to implement. And so there just wasn't, even the best servers at the time couldn't implement, much less a 486 or a 286 machine.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, a lot of it is compute, and we're just at an age where we can tie computers together better than we ever could.
Yeah, and I mean, let's talk a little bit about the data underneath as well. I mean, so right now we have a problem in the data world, and the problem is that because of cloud computing, because of AI, we are now holding hot data, at almost all of it. So unless it's on a tape and stored away from the internet, it's all hot data.
Yeah.
Agentic systems is interesting, because it can create some effect there. What do you think would happen to data should we go forward with these kind of systems?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if you draw a line kind of like today and tomorrow, it's easy to tell that for the most part, 99.99% of the data that the AI can access was generated by people.
Yep.
And there are neural networks and things, some exceptions, but it's a tiny fraction, right? But roll the movie forward 5 years from now, and the amount of information being generated by AI could be at least in the double digits, maybe low double digits, can be larger, and so it's going to be harder and harder to determine what was. And additionally, there are they keep saying, well, everything's been indexed, everything that. I know that not to be true because again, I've worked with the NBA, for example, very quite a bit. It looks like Can you hear me? Looks like my connection dropped for a second.
Yeah, you
good.
slowed down for a little bit.
In the NBA, for example, they have literally like a warehouse of digital records of everything they've ever broadcast, back in a time. That's just not online. And so all that hasn't been used to build these models. And it's the same. You go to the NGA, National Geospatial Agency, and they have tapes, entire warehouses of backup tapes that aren't online and things like that. So we still have, I don't know why people are coming out, Alon and others are saying, hey, everything that has been indexed can be indexed. I think they're just trying to get people to focus on other things.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I mean, I can tell you that there are, I met with a boxing promoter who said he's still sitting on analog tapes. They still haven't been digitized. So forget
Yeah.
about, actually being indexed. Yes, they're indexed, but they're indexed in the Dewey Decimal System. So that's not very helpful, to build that kind of catalog if it's sitting away from where it is. So there is a tremendous amount of knowledge. I would assume that SETI information, for instance, because they collect such huge amounts of data, that's all probably sitting in undigitized even at this point. So yeah, so
Yeah.
there is of course the that side of it. When it comes to the future of AI, what are your thoughts? There's so much, kind of information, misinformation, half information, or no information, depending on who you speak to.
Yeah, sure.
And then, of course, everybody comes back to the Terminator for some reason. So let's put the Terminator side of it aside. What are your thoughts on the future of AI?
Yeah. Hold on one second. That's a good question. I think in general, AI is a good thing. I'm on the pro side of life, and I see a spectrum essentially. I remember in college, the best students were the ones who could memorize the most, the fastest. Now, those students weren't really good at figuring out what they memorized and whether it conflicted with other things they memorized, meaning they weren't necessarily highly functional in what they memorized, but they had a very, very good memory. And they were the ones that kind of bubbled to the top. And then, and so you have the spectrum of like what you know is really powerful. And then I think it changed a little bit with the kind of advent of computer science. It's how you can use what you know became very powerful, and that you didn't have to be a lexicon or a perfectionist at Jeopardy and things like that. Those are the ones that kind of won in business before. You had to actually understand a little bit more of the mechanics of the world in order to bubble to the top and compete and things like that. And I think what we're seeing is with AI, it's pushing us towards those who can absorb data quickly, not necessarily memorize it for all time, use that data very effectively and with a high level of creativity, then those are the people that are going to do really well in this kind of AI era. And so I think that's good, because I think in general, humans are extremely creative. I think that we all have our own neural pathways. The AI does not replace the individuality of humans. And what it does is it accelerates and makes your imagination, it's a forcing factor, if you will, that allows what otherwise would have been 1% of the world to enact their imagination on the world with money. It lowers that barrier significantly, where other people can come in and use their imagination to enact positive things, hopefully, in society. And that bar is way lower now in terms of innovation, and it'll just keep getting lower and lower. And ultimately what that means is that when you have an idea to implementation to impact, meaning when you are taking the demand of something, you're putting it as close to the supply as possible. And I think that's a good thing overall.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's always this kind of discussion of saying, what if Newton or Einstein had access to AI? Would it be an accelerant? Would it still be an accelerant for them? Because I mean, if you look at kind of simple things in astrophysics, Newton would figure out the Vulcan theory, or then Einstein would disprove the Vulcan theory, but purely mathematically and in long form mathematics, writing it on pieces of paper.
Yeah.
So we are in a new world where we don't need to write
Yeah.
anything. Where you know, so what are your thoughts on kind of how does this actually help us advance in our thought process? I mean, there's a lot of, industrial application. There's lots of application. And of course, college students have been thrilled for the last, 5 years because, I think 90%, I'm just making up the figure, but 90% of college papers are at least some way derived from some form of AI,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even if it was just to do error correction, right? Um, so does this really help us become better thinkers? Do we use it as a tool to become even smarter?
I, Again, I'm always on the positive side. I think the answer is yes. I think what it's going to do is it's going to make the valleys deeper and make the peaks higher. So it's kind of like a amplifier, if you will, on both sides. That if it's someone who doesn't want to absorb knowledge and is really trying hard not to use their brain, it will help them do that better. And if it's someone who really enjoys learning and enjoys engaging and enjoys producing and production and doing things imaginatively and creatively, it's going to help them do that faster. And so it's I don't know if it'll produce more of one or the other, or if it will slow one of them down more than the other. I think another question would be, would there have been more Einsteins if the base level of information was available to the rest of the world? And I would like to think the answer is yes. I think the one worry I have is that when you're sitting with nothing, beside a lake, and you're forced to think about a lot all at once, I do think it exercises a component of big thinking that AI may deter, because in essence, when I speak to AI, I end up kind of I do more little thinking that's then put together by AI. And so that's one area where it would be interesting to see what happens. I
Right.
think when
Yeah.
visualization comes online, when you can actually ask the AI, I want to visualize what I'm thinking, then it may actually help the big thinking, but it
Yeah.
doesn't do that yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember years ago, when we were having the calculator debate of saying whether calculators should be used in school such a long time ago. And a professor of mine said to me and said, the reason you do long division and you do it the long way is so that you can see your mistake, you can visualize it. So you're exactly right in the sense that if I just use AI to say, okay, divide this and this, and it's a very simple calculation, um, the AI will just give me the answer, but I'll never learn from my mistake.
Yeah, you haven't made the dots between the real world and the actual concept. You're just using the concept like a like a robot
Exactly.
in that
Yeah. No,
sense.
no, absolutely. When coming back to the agentic side of things, um, there's a lot of cross process between different agents. How does that work? I mean, how do you actually get data to move it so that it's actionable?
Yeah, I mean, right now the frameworks are very nascent. They're very early, and in fact, the way that they talk to each other is through English. And I can't imagine that. I mean, while English is amazing as a communications method from one computer to another, I don't think English is probably going to be the best methodology. So I do think there's going to be a lot of maturing of these frameworks where the conversations aren't going to be reduced to English and then back to compute and then back to English. So that's one component. And then another one is how does it take actions? And I think that most of the industries that start out this way start discussing standards. How do you plug in essentially actionable frameworks, which is say you wanted to do something simple like send an email. Does everybody have to write their own little email agent, or is there going to be an agent that is just accessible to everyone on every platform that all it does is email with whatever authentication that you use? And then you just can scale that thought up, which is, okay, well, what if you have security devices and IoT devices and all these other things that it has to, again, that's the interaction with the real world or other systems that exist. How is that messaging going to happen? And all of that is somewhat unknown because we're just in this new territory. On the flip side, we have examples going back 20 years of how we might do things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a lot to learn from how we have evolved. If you look back at kind of what the original programming languages were, and then the evolution in programming itself to today, where I think programming has become much more simple, but at the same time much more challenging. What are your thoughts on what is happening in the programming side of the world now?
I mean, pre-AI and currently, that's very much what I've seen. It's like, yeah, you can get started quickly, but the learning curve is massive. And 20 years ago, that was not true. Like you'd use Visual Basic or the original some of these original languages that were made to make programming easier. Well, you can write a hello world app, but if you look at any architecture that's making a certain amount of money online right now, it's very complicated. And it's no longer just I write a program in the language and then I hit publish and life is good. It's like you need compliance and you need security and you need storage and you need data and like the number of expertise that you need are growing, and honestly, the colleges are producing people with only one of those expertise. So you're going to have one security guy, and you're going to have another guy that's a cloud guy, and you're going to have another guy that's a back end guy, and then you have the UX guy, and so that just creates complications there too, because anytime you put multiple people together from different domains and ask them to kind of row in the same direction, you now need communications, and then so now you have all these communications platforms springing up, not just Teams, not just Zoom, but other things that are really specific towards development. I think that's part of the reason why people are so excited is that there's just this feeling that it's becoming overly complex and almost impossible to achieve your large goals unless you're a large company, unless you put billions behind something. then your large goals are unattainable. And maybe this AI is going to reduce that friction.
Yeah, no, but coming back to, what you said about creativity, I think, obviously creativity is such an important thing. And creativity is something that is learned. It can be a learned behavior. And what are your thoughts as you move forward? We have about a minute and a half or so left, about what does the next generation need to prepare for? Because we are at this unique time and space, where, as you said, we are from nascent to somewhat developed stages, but we are, accelerating. The technology cycle, as you know, is ever reducing. From an 8 to 10 year technology cycle, and we're down to, I would think, in months, if not weeks.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, and I think even prior to this, but now even more so, we have to look at our education systems, and they're extremely broken, not just in terms of their functionality, but in terms of their form. I mean, my daughter's in high school right now. She's finishing up as a senior, and you look at things like the U.S. history class. It's not that history isn't important; it's absolutely important. But the question is do you understand the various eras? And of those eras, can you understand kind of the impact and why it matters? The question is not, what exactly did this one person say on a hill in New Jersey in 1872? And so they're not exercising the creativity around history. They're exercising kind of what historians tend. I think it's kind of like, if you're a history professor, you're interested in all these details. And so in general, history is taught about the details. But in reality, in the future, what's going to help people the most is understanding impact. And that's at the creative level of history, for example. And you just go class by class and you look at things like physics and whatever that's being taught. It's all great concepts, but they're becoming less and less applicable. And the question again is, I would be more interested from an employer standpoint. I'd be more interested in, if I gave you a complex formula that you've never seen before, and I gave you AI and all the tools you could possibly use, how quickly could you understand the formula, change it a little bit based on my new application, and then move forward? That's the real question we should be asking ourselves, how quickly we can do that. And I get that there's the fundamentals of education in order for you to do that, but a good portion, I'd say 60 or 70% of high school, is not geared towards those questions, towards preparing people for those things.
Yeah. Well, Nils, we're out of time, but I wanted to thank you so much. This has been a really, really enlightening subject. I believe there's so much more to learn. I didn't want to make it too technical, because obviously we want to make sure that people understand what we're doing and what we're talking about. But what I understand from it is the impact that agentic systems will have in the future. While they may be, certainly nascent right now, I think that there's a lot of, with people like you, people that are in development cycles, or are looking at this as and in thought process. This is wonderful, to see that there is a different way to go forward. So with that, Nils,
Yep.
I thank you again and look forward to our next conversation next time. You have a
Likewise, I
wonderful day.
appreciate being invited. Thank you.